He's angry about mortgages. It's Angry Mortgage. He's swearing. He's cursing loud. He's old. He's opinionated. And he's been doing this so damn long. This program is about mortgages, and this is mortgage advice, but the advice may not apply to your situation. Contact licensed mortgage professionals for specific recommendations before you make decisions about mortgages. You may not agree with Ron, but if you don't, he thinks you're wrong. Oh, and did we say there is a lot of swearing?
And we are back. So I'm excited today. I'm excited because one of the things we love to do on the show is bring in people who actually do the work. You know, when you talk to people who if you look on mainstream media and you're on, I don't know, CTV, CBC, don't get excited, and CBC might not be around that much longer, but when you go into mainstream media, there's always an expert. There's supposedly an expert, and the expert is always somebody strangely from a university or from government, okay? But they're the expert on a subject. Now, I don't believe in that. I believe the expert on any subject is the person who's actually done the work. Somebody who's, if you're talking about building in Ontario, I want to talk to somebody who's actually built structures in Ontario. And that's what we have today. Ian Jones, BGI Group. Ian, tell us a bit about your history.
Ooh. Thank you, Ryan, very much for letting me come on. Okay, I'll give you the abbreviated version. I came to Canada from Glasgow in 1960, scraped through to grade 12 in Winston Churchill in Scarborough, and immediately went to work for McNamara Construction, who was doing the below grade Toronto subway. And after that, I worked for a foundation company who built the CN Tower. You know, so this was all my learning experiences. And in 1970, the company that built Place Ville Marie in Montreal, and plus, I can't remember the other one, they hired me, because they opened a Toronto office, they hired me as a contracts manager. You know, my background's a chartered quantity surveyor. I went through Ryerson and George Brown 4 nights a week for 4 years to become a chartered quantity surveyor. You know, so... You know, about 1980, I figured everything that I've learned for the past 17 years is what a developer does. So I formed my company in 1980. And the very first project we did is one that I'd mentioned on Yonge Street. So I don't know if you know, that's basically...
you've been doing building in Ontario, but particularly in other parts of Canada.
Yeah, mainly Toronto.
Mainly Toronto, since 1980. So you have before that, but on your own since 1980.
That's right.
And you have the entire history of this stuff. You've got 45 years to compare. And by the way, I know sometimes people say, Ron, you're old and you always talk about old stuff and history and stuff. Here's my point, and I'm going to stick with it, is if you actually know the history, it helps you figure out what's going wrong now. Okay. Exactly. And that's one of the great benefits of talking to Ian. So let's because condos are so much in the news today, we're going to start by talking about that. And I really do want to go back to the 1980s story, because I think it's just an absolute banger. But let's start talking about condos. So you were building condos and you made a decision to step back from the market. What was it, about 2017?
Yeah, about 8 years ago.
8 years ago. And tell us the genesis of that decision. How did you decide?
Well, again, we'll touch on it, but, you know, I'd been through a similar situation in 92, you know, with the meltdown and the drop 40 or 50% in values of
So
condos.
What made you start to think about it in 17?
I knew it was coming.
You knew it?
I just didn't know when. You know, it was overdue in 2017, 2018. You know, so I figured this thing is building up, you know, and the pressure's going to release at some point. You know, I just didn't know when.
Okay, so talk about the warning signs that you saw as you progressed up to 2017?
Well, although most of it was under the radar, as we know, the banks need 70% pre-sales to,
Yep.
to give the developer a construction loan. And most of that was under the radar. There was talk about 20% investors, 30, so it wasn't really a big issue. But as the time progressed, right into the likes of 2018, you kept hearing the stories about some of these buildings are 70 to 80%.
70 to 80% investor owned. People who intended never to live there.
That's right.
Just rented out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that time, of course, Airbnb was front and center. So they could carry the cost, because if without Airbnb they were about 1,000 underwater at that time. So.
Okay, so that's a great point. Because you're right. Sometimes because things happen fast, and we know the sort of enormous pushback and almost the destruction of Airbnb, particularly in British Columbia and Ontario. That's sort of it's in the rearview mirror. But in 2017 and 2018, it was actually at the forefront. That's fair to say, right?
Yes, very much so. And that, when you worked out the numbers, if they could get $6,000 a month, from Airbnb out of that 400 or 500 square foot condo, they'd buy them all day long.
So that was one of I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes, again, you forget about exactly what it was like. And now that you've mentioned it, yeah, Airbnb was everywhere. The discussion of it, the theory of it, the discussion of how much money you could make out of it. It was so big and growing in 2018. And it grew some more right up until COVID. It kept on going. And yeah, you're right. $6,000 a month. You could easily get it. I mean, it's a hotel. It's an illegal hotel.
Right.
But that's what it was.
Right. The cracks began to show with the, if you had 50% in the building, the people buying them to do Airbnb, you had the other 50% owners through their board saying, "Oh, you got to do something about this." So
because they didn't like it. The people who lived in the building hated Airbnb.
It.
Yeah.
Hated it. Yeah. I mean, there was a shooting in some, I can't remember, but anyway, so they obviously convinced the city to pass the bylaws, which went to court. To prohibit them. You had to stay in them for 28 days, all of those rules and regs. And it basically killed the Airbnb option. But all of these investors were in firm contracts.
So I guess the other thing that was also became really prevalent, certainly before, but really after 2018, it was very evident in 2018, was sale by assignment. Like people who bought a unit with no expectation of ever moving in. They were just going to flip it for a profit to the next person on completion. Because we have to keep coming back to this, folks. It's like a 5 to 6 year interim by the time you pre-sell a building to the time when you need to form the condo corporation and it's all done and over.
Right.
So that was another factor, wasn't
it? Sure. And it... and basically what it allowed, these assignment deals, everybody had been looking at what happened in the 2 or 3 years previous, people picking up $50,000 or $100, just by flipping the piece of paper, the purchase agreement, but as that progressed into COVID and past it, then basically, basically what you have is all of these condos that are sitting there with closings coming up in the next 2 years.
So that sort of takes us to, but you decided in 2018, you thought that the writing was on the wall, that and was that based on the fact you thought the prices had reached a point where they wouldn't work anymore?
Well, again, like on LinkedIn back then, I was posting reality without Airbnb. The units at that time, 1,200 a foot or whatever, they were $2,000 a month underwater by the time you factored in, even a 2% mortgage plus the condo fees, etc. Insurance, management, So all they were banking on was the future capital appreciation, and now that's totally history.
So it was clear to you, as a guy who studied numbers, as a guy who tried to figure out the viability of a project, it was clear to you way back in 2017, 2018, that if you wanted to rent these units out at the prices that people were signing on the dotted line for, that mathematically it wouldn't work out then.
Not at all. No.
And so now we're now 2019, fast forward 6 years, 5 years, and they're all coming to fruition, and there's reverse appreciation. Like the units are now worth less than what they paid for. And I guess as we've talked about on the show many times, there's no hope to these rents. I mean, it's never going to get there to the point where, especially at a 4% mortgage rate, it's never going to get there to the point where you're going to always going to have negative cash flow for a decade.
Right.
Fair? Yeah.
Right. And what they were hoping for is that, they'd keep getting up 1,500 a foot, 2,000 a foot, and, being $2,000 a month underwater or $3,000, that's 36 grand a year that, that you're just eating into, that future capital appreciation. But that's gone, so they're, they're faced with that monthly amount and depreciating, asset. It's a lose-lose situation.
So the assumption of capital appreciation, strong capital appreciation, turned out to be so wrong, but you couldn't talk anybody out of it in 2018, right? That's just, everybody believed it. But you didn't believe it. You looked at the math and said, this isn't going to work.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So I want to explore a bit with you just what can happen when this hopeless economic situation unfolds for condo buildings, because you built condominiums in prior to the last big lull in real estate, which was sort of peaked in 90. And just tell us that story about 1992. What happened to you in Milton in 1992?
Okay, it was a 16-story, 155 units. We started it in 89, I believe, and finished it in 92.
Wow, 3 years, that's quick.
Yeah, and we had to revise all the zoning and everything. But anyway, and we had 130 of the 155 units sold firm, in quotes, and then it came time to occupancy, and most of them went along with that because they didn't have to come up with the closing funds.
So just for the sake of the people listening, occupancy is when you call them up as say, hey, the lawyer, you got to sign to take not to take possession of the unit, but you're not ownership.
Right. Yeah.
You get possession, so it's time for you to find a tenant or move in yourself or whatever the case may be. You pay your company, the developer, that person pays them for a certain period of time, which is kind of a rent, you might say, designed to cover the mortgage and all the other costs. And but eventually, when all the units are full, then you become a condo corp can be formed, and that's the process. Okay,
right. And that's usually about a 6-month lag, after the paint dries and people take occupancy. And it was just through that 6-month process that you obviously watching what the market was doing and everything, and you're saying to yourself, we've got a problem coming up here, and sure enough, when our lawyers sent all the buyers the notice to actually close the deals, on registration, 80% of those 130 deals did not close. They walked from the deals.
Okay, let's backtrack on that a second. So a bunch of people had moved in, and some end users and some renters. Okay. And even though they were in the building, when the time came to close, these people's analysis, the buyer's analysis of where they were, like I paid, what would a number be that they paid, for example?
200.
200, okay. And now it was only worth
150.
150, yeah. Okay. And they said, you know what? I'm walking away. And they had probably about 10% deposits in at that time, right?
Yeah, 10% would be the number, yeah.
So they walked away. And so enough of them walked away, because we're going to talk in a couple of minutes about how many we think are walking away in Toronto right now. But 80% said no, or just keep my deposit and I'll leave. That's it.
Right. And the first clue was they didn't take occupancy. Then if they're not moving in, then chances are they're not going to close. They might be paying the rent during the occupancy, but if they keep it vacant, that's them just trying to keep a lid on the fact that they're not going to close in a few months.
Gotcha. So, Ian, 80% didn't close. What in the world could you do at that point? Oh my! Oh wow! It's just that's wild. We haven't had 80% in Toronto yet, folks. We may have it someday, but we haven't had 80% in Toronto yet. But you had it. It happened, and you weren't the only guy it happened to either.
No. I mean,
I think the whole of Bramalea had happened to, right?
Yeah, there was a lot like that.
Yeah.
Because they had all fallen at 40% or whatever it was at the time. Basically we sat with the lender at the time and says, look, we'll stick with it. We're not just going to throw the keys on the table, they say, and it's over to you, your problem. He said, we'll stick with it until they're all resold and you're paid back, hopefully, and we'll take it from there. So what we did is we introduced, number one, the HOPE program, Home Ownership Participating Equity, come up with that, for 100% financing. In other words, the mortgage was 75, we'd take back a second of the 25 for some of the future
So
equity.
you restructured to the new current price that you could sell it for.
That's right.
And offered it on a 100% basis that they would get 75% of the new price and you would provide 25% as a second mortgage.
Okay, well, just with one comment, the banks require you to keep the original prices until everything has been tried and failed. So that was based on keeping the 200. The bank doing the mortgage is 75% and us taking the other 25% as a second entitled for equity build-up. So the second item was, this was in 92, we advertised free condo fees until the year 2000. So that was 8 years.
8 years
of free condo fees.
Wow.
But obviously we didn't want to be involved in it through 8 years. So we gave them a credit on closing.
Oh, okay.
To bring the closing price down. The third item is we gave free flights on the Concorde to London, England.
Wow. Wow.
And thankfully not the last one. And the fourth item was, because we're down to about 50 still unsold. We brought in US auction house, and at the Skyline Hotel and the airport. We had an auction for the last 50 units with a reserve bid, etc., and that sold the rest of them.
So you employed every tool in the toolkit to figure out a way to get these all finally sold.
That's right.
Okay. And so the lender was paid off.
Yeah, not quite.
They took a little haircut, did they?
Yeah.
Okay.
But with all of that, we managed to, again, our profit was history.
Yeah.
It was zero.
Yeah.
And zero fees for that 12 months.
All the work you did, yeah.
Yeah. So they were happy enough, if I can call it that, just to get the thing off their books because they had quite a few others.
So you've seen what we haven't actually seen yet, and you were involved. You were doing it
daily.
You saw the possibility of what happens when the condo buyer says, keep my deposit, litigate me, I don't care. And you can kind of manage that at 10%, right? That's probably fair to say. If 10% of the people say, no, I'm not, you can.
Oh, yeah, right.
I don't want to buy. I don't want to close. 10%. You could probably, if you're a solid builder, experienced, rich developer, you could probably even handle 20%, right? 20, maybe even 25. Who knows? You can find a way to maybe get an inventory loan, and then you can, because folks, it's all about forming the condo corp. Once you form the condo corp, you have a shot at paying. You can pay off the building loan. You can pay off the construction financing. So that was the key to get, and we're seeing it today. We don't see too many failures once the building's finished. Have you heard of any?
Well, the receiverships, there are a few out there.
Unfinished buildings?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, tell us about it.
I think Van Maar is one of them. That got three projects that were finished, I think, or close to finishing, and they went into receivership. I don't want to be guessing at at these because they might still be in litigation or whatever. Sure. But that's the part that I believe that you're going to see increase. These receiverships. Until then, it's all under the radar.
Yeah, it is very much under the radar. Even the things I just talked about, where 20% of the people said, no, you can keep my deposit and chase me. I'm not going to go ahead. You don't hear about it. Like that is not something that's being reported virtually anywhere.
Right.
It's very much under cover. So if a building goes into receivership, so you've suggested there's a couple, not many in the scheme of things, because we have the biggest number of cranes even at double cranes, we still have the largest number of cranes in North America here for a decade,
right.
Building condos. So what do you think happens to these receiverships? Like the bank just tries to get to a point where do they sell it to somebody else and tell everybody to take their deposits back, or?
Well, that's my guess. And funnily enough, it may be an answer to people getting their deposit back. Because if enough of these do not close, sure, the developer has the right to keep the deposits and sue them. And by the way, just as an added one for your listeners, the developer has the right to apply to court for a lis pendens, and that registers, it's Latin for certificate of pending litigation, against the buyer's house, and it just
they full recourse, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and it sits there until it resells, and it's the cost is counted. So so that's basically what I believe is still coming, and the only way that you see is receiverships getting announced, and they do. And basically what that is if the bank is sitting in first mortgage position, which they always are, that's the bank taking possession of the building, and preferably at the finished state, or to get the developer to stay involved. Small thing like personal guarantees make sure of that. So that is when everything will start to surface, because there's some good investigative journalists out there that really report on these receiverships. So what I believe, and I've been wrong before, if there's 50,000 of those, out there that are heading for
units pending completion,
in that first stage occupancy, and if it looks like they're going to default on the deals, if enough of them default on the deal, then the developer cannot pay the construction loan, and that's got a short leash unless the bank signs what's called a forbearance agreement. And that allows the developer time to continue on to try and resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets to the point where the bank says, okay, enough is enough, and they take possession of the building. But I believe in, we'll see, I believe that they will not take possession unless they've got an agreement set up with either a REIT or a pension fund to take over that building and change it from condo to rental.
Okay, so the vision would be, if I could just summarize, the vision would be that so many people say, I won't close, that it's way past 20% or 10% or whatever, but it's way too many. It's going back to your sort of scenario of more than half. Say, no, keep my deposit, I'm not going to close, because I'm paying $1,400 a square foot, and across the street it's $950 a square foot. So I know I've had it.
That's
okay?
right.
So, and the rents won't work, and it's literally a financial Armageddon. Like no end of it works. Capital appreciation has gone backwards, and the rents never worked in the first place. So I'm finished.
Yeah.
So under that scenario, bank puts the developer into receivership, takes control of the building, and your thought is sell it to a REIT, which is designed to own apartment buildings, or a pension plan, which also owns apartment buildings, and you were going to turn that condo building into a rental building.
And it's easy.
It's not hard, is it?
No.
Okay.
You keep the condo title, but you don't sell the condos. You just rent the condos.
You rent the condos.
You own 100% of them.
Okay, but you form a condo corp?
No, well, it will have been formed by that time.
No, it may not, though. They may not.
Well,
they may not have been able to form a condo corp.
If I was a pension fund, I'd say, okay, finish registering the condo, and we'll buy the building with the condo corp in place, so that 5 years from now, if the market recovers, it gives us the option to sell the units at that time. instead of keeping it as a rental.
So you think there'd probably be a desire to maintain optionality. So the idea is the bank wipes out the developer, all the developer's equity, all their costs that they invested in land and permitting, it all gone. And that gap, that 30, 35%, whatever it is, now the bank can say, okay, REIT, okay, pension plan, it's 65 cents on the dollar for the building, and do with what do you want it to do? Do you want to turn it into a condo? Or do you want to just operate it as a full-time rental property? But that's the answer. But would those rents work, or would even the REIT take a little bit of a beating for a couple of years?
Well, again, if it's a straight rental, there's a lot of CMHC money, and even with change of government, I think that's still going to be there. So sure, they have to pencil out, but getting a finished building risk-free at 65 cents on a dollar, they're going to work.
It's gonna be interesting because you could, as you say, if you could get CMHC involved, you can get 50-year amortization, you can get preferred interest rates, so that could work for you. Okay. Yeah. All right. So that is, and then do you think that's a scenario where the people who bought would get their deposits back?
Yeah, well, therein lies the
that's the interesting thing. Yeah, okay.
Now, if I was a developer, I wouldn't. The first thing the developer could do is take the deposits of everybody that walks from the deal. He's not going to give the deposits back because that situation has potentially put him into bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but if that is worked out as part of the developer, arranging with the bank so that it allows the bank to sell it to the pension fund, then what they have to do, if they're going to operate it as a rental building, they have to give the deposits back.
Okay. All right. So it might go through some stages. There might even be a stage where the developer sues the people who won't close, right, even though it's a massive number. It might be 60% of the buyers. Okay. Might be 80%. Who knows? We don't know. Right. So the litigation starts. And then as the receivership approaches, the people who is it possible the people who are willing to close might get their deposits back and the rest would end up in litigation? Because they failed their contract, their side of the contract, right?
No, the developer probably would take the deposits because if it's putting the developer into bankruptcy, because he's got other worries about paying bills and everything. And whether he pursues, and he could pursue all of those defaulted buyers, they take their homes, if you like.
But the real key is the bank. The bank really calls the shots because there's just you've confirmed there's just a limited amount of time the bank will put up with. Hey, you were supposed to form the Condo Corp and you didn't. Right. We were supposed to get paid back and we aren't. Right. We've waited 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Time's up. That's it. It's time's up.
And don't forget, the banks out for whatever $100 million. All they initially were getting was the 7% interest or whatever it was. They've got $100 million on their books that's potential bad debt. So they'll be looking to get rid of that and get rid of that off their books. So I really see the pension fund. I know that's what I'd do. If I could get a finished building for 65 cents on a dollar and just
in a good location
with a stroke of a pen, make it a rental instead.
Yeah, I guess it's just crawling through the minefield of litigation.
That's right. So and it could be minimal. If the parties agree, and the bank's got the developer. You know what I mean?
The developer's not got much say in anything.
So it's just the bank sitting down with the REIT or whatever, putting out bids through Colliers or whatever. This building's for sale.
Yeah. Okay.
But that'll be done privately off the books.
No. Yeah, by the way, that's a great explanation of what we fully expect to see more of in the next 18 months.
I really do.
I believe it. I've talked about it before. You believe it. And you have gone through it. So it's much more vivid to you. You've actually not gone through it all. So the thing that drives us crazy as people looking at the real estate scene in Ontario is the incredible ramp up in the cost of real estate. Like why in the world a house in Barrie sells for $1 million? I mean, it's just bizarre, right? Because you used to work in the United States. You were telling me you worked on projects in Dallas, and nobody would ever imagine that a town like Barrie, that's so far away from the core of Dallas-Fort Worth, would ever be sold for $1 million. It's crazy. So talk about how we got there, because you told me a really fascinating story of how government has gotten away from themselves, gone into a land of insanity. So how many reports do you have to do just to get a sort of a start on an application for a permit for subdivision? Like, what do you have to do to get there? Commercial subdivision.
Okay, well, just quickly, when the province brought in Bill 23 2 years ago, it was putting penalties on planning departments if they did not approve stuff within a certain time. And the planning department says, oh, well, how can we avoid these permits? We'll have a two-stage pre-consult, putting the application in. And what it means is you have to evaluate half of the reports in when you apply, if you're going to rezone, and the other half later at site.
So when the province tried to tighten up what was obviously an incredibly long process to get something built, the response to the municipalities was, well, we'll outsmart you. We'll add a new process that will take up more time until we get to the mandated process of issuing a building permit.
Exactly right. Yeah, you're bang on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more cost up front for an applicant, whether it's a developer or a non-profit or whatever, to get through this approval minefield. So there's at least 20 reports.
At least 20.
At least,
Give me an example of what's some are common, some make sense, and some probably don't.
Yeah, some do, and I've got an answer for that. The traffic report, the noise report.
Noise report?
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, yeah. If there's a train running by, no problem. A environmental study.
Archaeological?
That too. And the archaeological, weighs heavily now on Indigenous, which I don't have any real, argument with them, but it's the process. Some of them, obviously, you just shake your head at. The latest was the requirement for a phosphorus report.
Hold on. A phosphorus report?
Seemingly there's phosphorus in everything, like this mic, whatever. And basically what the report has to identify is how much of that phosphorus ends up in Lake Ontario or the rivers. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done.
Wait a second. You did a water table report. You had to do that because that's been around forever, right? Studying the water table, make sure.
Yeah.
You did an environmental, but now you're saying there's a separate phosphorus report to sort of analyze something that may or may not be there, but is actually everywhere. It's everywhere, right?
So they say.
Yeah. Okay. So 20 reports minimum, and that gets you. You still haven't got to the building permit. You got to do 10 reports and you haven't even got there yet, right?
Well, what happens is each one of those reports has a good 2 or 3 months to do.
Oof.
And then you put it into the planning department. They then give it a peer reviews outside third-party engineers, etc. Those engineers, those peers, they come back with their comments on the one you've submitted. And often our engineers disagree with the peer engineers. So you're sitting in this no man's land.
Hold on. Ian, I got to get, this is startling. The information you just gave me is startling. So you're saying that before you ever get to the point of even getting to the permit department, when you're dealing with the planning department, you've got to assemble all these reports that take months to do. And then when you give it to the planning department, they don't actually look at it themselves. They farm it out to others to take another month or two to look at it and come back. Why can't that department do it on their own? This is nuts.
What you just described is the way it used to be. Back in 1980, the planning department did all of that. But since then, I don't know what was to avoid hiring more planners. I don't know. But the city ended up, I think, getting all of these additional reports to protect them against liability.
It's a lot about a liability, right? Liability is what everybody thinks about today.
So.
Okay. So you're right. That's even worse than I thought because we're back to the new biggest growth industry in Canada for the last 15 years, consultants. So that at every level of government, we're just inundated with consultants. So you're saying these studies that you did before you even got near the permit department, for the planning department, the application department, that they're going to send it to somebody else. They're not even going to do it themselves because they don't have the manpower or the interest or their
expertise anymore,
or whatever. Or somebody has decided that it's better to show it to others, consultants, expensive consultants, I'm guessing, who are going to
paid by
you, who's trying to develop the property, and they're going to come back with a bunch of sometimes fine, sometimes nonsense, which you're then going to dispute with your engineers, and then they're going to send it back to them, and there's going to be some more rigmarole in between, right?
Back and forth.
All the time delaying the whole process. Because
yeah.
you haven't even got to asking for a permit yet, right?
Right. No, you can't until that planning process is complete. And just to be specific, when all the reports are done and the planning department is satisfied that they've all been submitted and reviewed, blah, 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 they issue what's called a notice of complete application. And that is the one document that you begin to breathe a sigh of relief, because the province has said when that notice is issued, the council has got 90 days to pass a bylaw or they can appeal to the province.
So what is that, about 18 months or 2 years just to get to that point?
Yeah, some are longer than that.
Some are longer.
Yeah, you hear of 3 and 4 years for some projects where the local ratepayers, I'll call them, come out and the activist groups come out and say, no way, this should be built here. Too many shadows, blah, blah, blah.
Shadows, yeah, the famous shadow stuff, yeah. Too much noise, too many shadows. Okay, so yeah, it's ridiculous. So what I'm hoping the listeners and viewers will understand is, when you've got to do all that work before you even get to the point of trying to get a permit, all this time, all these studies, that's big money. So somebody's got to come up with that money. And eventually it all has to funnel into the final price.
Exactly.
That's just the way math works. That's just the way it goes. Okay, so now let's take a trip back in time for a second, okay? Because neither one of us are spring chickens. So we remember a point in the world where building stuff was actually relatively fast and efficient, okay? So let's cast our mind back to 1980, 45 years ago. And you wanted to convert a gas station to a mixed-use building. Tell us about that.
Okay, that was our first development project when I formed my development company in 1980. I had 17 years experience by that time, so I felt it was time. So remember the ChargeX that was the forerunner of Visa?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. I took $5,000 out of my ChargeX card and put the deposit on this gas station. It was at 1246 Yonge Street, just south of St. Clair. And we did up a design, submitted it to the city. It needed rezoning. And it took 4 months and 4 reports to actually get the building permit. So in that 4 months, it was rezoned and the building permit was issued. And we built it in 10 months.
Okay. Everybody's got to focus on this now. Everybody who's listening and viewing this show has got to focus on this. Because 45 years ago wasn't the Bronze Age, okay? Like it weren't medieval times, all right? It was just 45 years ago. I realize for people who are 30, it seems, wow, that seems like a lot. But really, it's not. And it took from putting a deposit down from your Visa card to leasing out and doing this whole process. You leased out the building.
During construction,
to a finished product for people moving in. The businesses and the condo people, the people who were going to live in the upper stories moved in.
Right.
That was like 14, 15 months.
Right.
Okay, everybody, that's insane compared with today. Like today, and here's the pip, in my opinion. The building's still there, right, Ian?
Yeah, go on Google, 1246 Yonge Street.
The businesses are happy. The condo owners are happy. By the way, those are nice big suites. I think they're about 1,200 square feet, right?
Yeah.
So everybody is happy. The building works. It hasn't fallen down. Hasn't even shown a sign of falling down. 4 reports, 4 months to approve, 10 months to build, and it's still there. Now, remember, Ian just described to us 2 to 4 years and 20 plus reports, including phosphorus, which is very important, obviously. No, it's not. But it took all that just to get to the point you could apply for a permit.
Exactly.
Now, just let's be clear. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And and it's all about liability, you're right. Because here's what happens in government, folks. Government just sees some minor thing goes wrong. Something goes wrong, and people are mad. Just like you talked about, it's activists, people who say, no, there's shadows or there's noise or there's, you're changing the neighborhood too much and we don't allow this. Today, instead of just getting on with stuff, we have groups of people who go to government and say, oh, this is all wrong. We need to check. We need to see if there's actually any arrowheads in all of these 160 acres. We need to figure this out, okay? Or we can't proceed. Now, we went 250 years not caring about the arrowheads, but now we're thinking about it. So what you got to realize, people, is that it just takes incredible costs are added to do all this. In the end, the developer doesn't pay. The home buyer pays, okay? And that's how it works. And it's all about because somebody said, if we don't do this, there may be a liability for something going wrong in the future. So let's create massive red tape to try to cover us up for the liability. Or we have the liability of the people complaining in the area that they don't like it. And that works against a city council who wants to get reelected, right? And it just has created this pyramid of money that has to be spent.
It's an easy answer.
Yeah.
The city requires security, letter of credit security for site services and landscaping right now.
Mm-hmm.
All I need to do is add another letter of credit or bond or whatever, and whatever the amount is, depending on the size of the project, for say $10 million. And that $10 million is sitting at risk. That if the project has any issues, it indemnifies the city against any liability. And the developer's LC or bond gets hit. The city doesn't.
So the idea is we've done the opposite. What we've done is we've had the city create a enormous mountain of regulation, whereas they just could have said, well, let's make sure there's a big bond available. If something does go wrong,
right,
we can get compensation for it.
And I'm not a lawyer, but there's an answer there, so that they know that they're covered, indemnified.
Instead of mountains of complexity.
Yeah.
And expense.
And time.
Yeah, and time. Okay, listen, you've got a new concept that you've developed in the last few years, and it's really interesting. So tell us about Joy Concept. Tell us how that is something you've developed.
Well, as you may have guessed, I'm in the leading edge of the boomers, 55 to 75 years old. So
I'm there too. I'm in that, yeah.
Right? And there's 8 million in Canada
Mm-hmm.
of that generation, and there's 80 million in the US, and we've worked there already. So this model is actually a new wellness model. It's not a care model, and it's where the independent living buildings out there are $5,000 a month, or they wait 10 years on a waiting list for apartments. These are from $1,300 a month. And the 1 and 2 bedrooms are less than half of what the independent living buildings out there are right now.
Way less, yeah.
Way less. So, so anybody that's stuck in their house, a senior, they basically don't want to sell because they have to pay $5,000 a month. No senior pays anything $5,000 a month. It just isn't in their DNA.
Well, unless they're ultra rich, you're right. But $5,000 a month is, if you think you come to the end of your working life, why would you look forward to paying $5,000 a month for a senior living environment?
And they're scared they run out of it.
Yep.
If the equity in their house, which is great right now, but and they want to leave money for their kids and all the rest of it. Anyway, these buildings, we don't want them. We don't need them. We worked 40 years as a for-profit developer. We're doing this on a philanthropic, not-for-profit basis, where churches and non-profits will own the finished building once we build it, fill it, and stabilize it. So that's the big picture model. And it comes with a community hub, which not only gives the end owner the use of the space, but also allows for the local community, use of the space for food banks or whatever.
Okay, let's talk about it. Break it down a bit. So we've got a church that, and some of these churches have been around since the 1940s and 50s. Yeah. They've got a chunk of land, and sometimes they're in very favorable locations. Yeah. Parishioner, but the building's old, and the number of parishioners may have declined a bit, but they're in prime space, and the church and the parishioners, they want to give back to the community. So your idea is, let's rebuild it all new, add these not care units, but wellness units, so that it's meant for people who are over 60, I assume, and who are in good health. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to rummage around in this bungalow anymore and shovel the snow and cut the grass and all this stuff. And it's not, and they may be renters. They may be renters right now, and the rents keep going up. Okay,
they're on a 10-year waiting list.
Yeah, and they're on a 10-year waiting list for supported rental properties. Yeah. So this gives the church says, okay, let's proceed with this. You get, what were you telling me, like 155 units, something you're working on right now?
Yeah, each of the buildings are from 150 to 200 units per building, 5-story to 9-story.
And it's integrated. So the church gets upgraded to a modern building. Mm-hmm. The community center goes with it, mm-hmm. so that there's lots of community use that gets out of it, where there wasn't before in an ancient building, right. A 80-year-old building. And you also you were mentioning to me that there's going to be like a doctor's office and a pharmacy not a doctor, integrated.
A clinic and a pharmacy.
Okay.
Yeah, integrated. But any other retail is just if it's another part of the site.
And concierge, so even though there's no care, if somebody needed something quickly, there's somebody who could help them out with that.
That's right. It's 24 hours. The two of them would be live and the other would be virtual, but tied in. Sure. Gets there.
So the concept is deliver comfortable living for, and the beauty of it, to my mind, is that it actually coincides with everything that new studies tell us about seniors living, is that you want to have exposure to younger people. You just don't want to be warehoused. Right. That's not good. And you've got people coming in and out of the community center, younger people. There might be some after-school activities going on in the community center, and there's actually an environment where there's real life going on. Okay, sure. So it's a great concept, and you can deliver it at these extremely. And in the end, the church still owns it once the whole thing's finished. Right. Okay, so the fact that the church owns it, you're never going to get rent evicted. There's never going to be, my sister's going to move in. You don't have to worry about any of those things that you have to worry about with condo rentals. Right. And it's good for the people inside. So
yeah, we've allowed 2% per year rent increase, just
mm-hmm. The normal stabilization. Yeah.
But it's up to the church. Once we turn it over, when it's 90% occupied, it's up to the church whether they rent them at all, and the cash flow that goes to the church, they can subsidize them even further if they want, mm-hmm. or open a food bank, whatever.
So this is the idea of taking a church, which is in often a prime location, but it needs revitalization. And instead of the church just selling and saying, well, parishioners will disperse the parishioners to other churches, this says we're going to revitalize the entire location.
That's exactly right.
To both favor the churchgoer, the community, and people over the age of 60 who want not a care facility, but want something that's rationally priced.
That's right.
They can get by.
That's right. And we can arrange the meals coming in.
Anybody can.
There's all sorts. Yeah,
anybody can. You're right. So, Ian, thank you. I mean,
welcome.
I love this stuff because it's nothing but truth. And look, of all the people out there, there's lawyers, but there's nurses, there's teachers, there's plumbers. And sure, the plumber understands how to get the plumbing into the building. But if you don't talk to a developer, you don't know the insanity of going from 4 reports to 20 reports, including the phosphorus and the arrowheads, and just how you want to understand how costs gets increased in building. This is where it comes from. And also that, yes, you can have a condo that fails completely. It can
it's coming.
It's coming.
Just one last thing. I don't have any issue with the building department. As long as your drawings and specs are what they should be,
Sure.
You'll get your building permit in 4 to 6 months. But the first question the building department asks is, have you got your signed site plan agreement from the planning department?
The planning department, yeah.
Otherwise, they don't lift a finger.
Yeah.
The building department.
The building department works in a rational way, but this incredible process of the application department,
Planning,
the planning group, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Ian, thank you.
You're
Thank you for
welcome. Thank you.
revealing the truth of how things really work if you want to build something in this town, particularly versus 45 years ago. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Ron. God bless. Bye-bye.
And we're out.
If you like the pod, well, don't just sit there. Go to YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all the other ones and like the pod. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep being angry at mortgages and swearing about mortgages. Angry Mortgage could use your support.